Real quick, if you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. Also, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at Campfire Cult Pod for free. It'll really help us reach listeners just like you. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. And finally, if you don't mind, please share, rate, and review wherever possible. Welcome, dear listener, to the Campfire Cult Podcast. From a camper van deep in the haunted woods, I bring you first-hand accounts of chilling encounters with the paranormal. Step into the night and take a peek into the realm where reality and the supernatural collide. My name is Jazz, and I'll be your host. Welcome back, campers. Tonight's fire burns a little hotter, because what you're about to hear isn't just strange, it's a full-on descent into the unexplainable. Tales of winged shadows in the sky, black-eyed beings lurking in plain sight, cloaked figures that vanish in flashes of light, and things stalking the woods that aren't quite beast, but sure as hell aren't human either. From a desperate statue-like figure in an Iowa cemetery, to a dogman creeping through North Carolina swamps, this episode covers cryptids, aliens, ghosts, and entities that defy every label we try to give them. Settle in and zip up that sleeping bag just a little bit tighter, because tonight we walk the thin line between reality and what lurks just beyond the firelight. Let's begin. Up first, a quiet camping trip near Crater Lake turns into a lifelong obsession after a woman's grandparents come face to face with something impossible.
I'm posting this on behalf of my grandparents. They're both in their 70s now and live in Southern Oregon. I've heard this story a few times growing up, but it wasn't until recently, when I brought it up again, that I realized how deeply it impacted them. My grandpa has spent the last 15 years researching everything he can about Bigfoot. My grandma, on the other hand, won't talk about it at all anymore. The sighting happened in August of 2010, near Crater Lake National Park. They were camping a few miles outside the park boundary. Not at a developed campground, just off one of the forest roads near the Rim Drive area. My grandpa said they'd parked and walked down toward a little ravine where they heard water flowing. That's when it happened. They were coming back up a slight incline when my grandma suddenly stopped and grabbed my grandpa's arm. About 50 yards up the slope, standing near a ridge above them, was what they both described as a large, upright figure. It was dark brown or black in color, at least 8 feet tall, standing completely still and watching them. It wasn't a bear. That's what my grandpa keeps repeating. It wasn't a bear. He grew up hunting and said everything about its shape, posture, and stillness was wrong for any known animal. He said the arms were too long, the shoulders too broad, and the way it tilted its head slightly while observing them was too human, but not. My grandma panicked. She started crying and wouldn't look at it, just begged him to go back to the car. My grandpa says he felt frozen in place for a moment, like his brain was trying to process something it couldn't explain. Then it turned, not quickly, but smoothly, and walked back behind the ridge. And it was gone. No sound, no crashing, just gone. Later, when he started researching more, he found the area is uncomfortably close to one of the known missing 411 locations. That discovery only made him more obsessed with what he saw. He's filled entire binders with maps, sightings, weather reports, even local legends. He swears there's more going on in the Southern Cascades than most people realize. My grandma won't even look at the binders. They never reported the sighting officially. My grandpa's told a few friends, but mostly he just writes and reads and watches for patterns. He's not someone prone to fantasy. He's a very grounded, practical guy. But whatever he saw out there changed something in him. He still goes back out there a couple times a year. Same area, still searching. If anyone's had an experience near Crater Lake or the surrounding forests, I'd love to hear it. My grandpa would be thrilled to know he's not the only one who's seen something out there.
This story really got to me, partly because I know that area well. I've spent a lot of time around Crater Lake in the Bend, Oregon region, camping, hiking, and just exploring. It's breathtaking country, but there's always been something off about those woods. The silence can feel unnatural at times, like something's holding its breath. Hearing about this sighting just a few miles from the rim, it makes me wonder how many others have seen something and stayed quiet. If you've had an experience out there, don't keep it to yourself. This might be part of something much bigger. Next, outside Birmingham, a hunter meets something far too tall, too silent, and too wrong to be any hog, something they ended up nicknaming Big Boy.
About 4 years ago, I lived in an old house just outside the city limits of Birmingham. Wild hogs are considered a nuisance around here and can be hunted year-round. The land wasn't mine, but it was legal hunting ground. My landlord gave me and my friends explicit permission to deal with any hogs we came across. So especially during the winter months, I'd often be posted up on the back porch with a cigar in one hand and a gun in the other. Sometimes I was alone, other times with friends. The land behind the house wasn't cleared. We had about 20 feet from the porch to the tree line before it dropped down a hill, and the brush got thick. Our version of hunting was simple: sit quietly and wait for rustling, then scan the woods for the telltale beady eyes of a hog. One night I heard something moving in the brush. I raised my head, expecting a hog. Sure enough, I spotted a pair of white beady eyes in the darkness. But they weren't at ground level. They were eye level with me. As my eyes adjusted, more of it came into view. It was tall and thin, with long, spindly limbs. Its entire body was pitch black. I couldn't see a face, just those glowing eyes. What made it worse was realizing that it was partway down the hill. If it was still at eye level from there, it had to be at least 10 feet tall. Then it started climbing the hill toward me. I had a gut feeling that my .45 wasn't going to do a damn thing to stop it. So I stood up slowly, grabbed my stuff, and went inside without taking my eyes off it. It didn't make a sound except for the soft crunch of leaves underfoot. When it reached the tree line, it paused, then turned and walked sideways along the edge. Its walk was strange, jerky and bobbing, like how some big birds move their heads when they walk. It looked wrong. That was the most terrifying thing I had seen in a long time, but that wasn't the only encounter. My hunting buddies and I saw it a few more times, always in the trees, never close, except when it was. Sometimes it would turn and stare at us. Other times it would just pace between the trees. My roommate, who moved in later that year, had her own run-in. She walked outside one night and saw it standing right up against the porch, looking down at her. It never acted aggressive, never attacked. Eventually, we stopped being outright scared, though we never let our guard down. We started calling him Big Boy.
Man, I don't care how many nights you've spent on a porch with a gun and a cigar, nothing prepares you for a 10-foot shadowy creature staring back. And the fact that it came back multiple times, that's not just creepy, that's territorial. Coming up, on a dark Louisiana highway, a driver witnesses a cloaked, squealing figure, and what follows is a flash of light and missing time.
On the night of November 10th, 2014, around 9:30 p.m., I was driving west on Interstate 20. I had just left Jackson, Mississippi, after visiting relatives and was heading home to Shreveport, Louisiana. It's a trip I make several times a year, but that night I saw something I still can't explain. As I approached Monroe, Louisiana, near the Garrett Road turnoff, I noticed something odd on the connecting road between the eastbound and westbound lanes. Other drivers clearly saw it too. Brake lights lit up all around me. I slowed down, and as I got closer, I saw a small person running in circles with one arm extended, like they were pretending to be an airplane. It was dark, so I couldn't make out any details, but the motion was unmistakable. By then, some vehicles had practically come to a stop. I pulled off onto the shoulder near the turnoff, afraid that maybe it was a child in trouble. I called 911. The dispatcher told me that several others had already reported the same thing. I got out of my car and saw a police cruiser approaching in the eastbound lane. I stood at the back of my vehicle, watching as it pulled onto the connecting road. At the same time, the little person began running away, across the grassy median, heading west, straight in my direction. It was only then that I could tell it wasn't a child. The figure was dressed in a long, dark cloak and stood about 3 feet tall. It made this hideous, high-pitched squealing sound, like a terrified pig. It kept running west and passed right by me. Just then, another police cruiser in the westbound lane shined its spotlight on the figure. And that's when it happened. A huge, brilliant yellow light flashed from above the little person. It was blinding, like nothing I'd ever seen. The flash lasted less than a second. I was stunned. My knees felt weak and I had to get back into my car. I looked out the window. Everything was pitch black. No headlights, no streetlights, nothing. Even the highway lights had gone out. I tried to start my car. It wouldn't even turn over. I just sat there in the dark, trying to process what I'd seen. After about 20 or 30 seconds, the car finally started, and the lights along the highway flickered back on. But the little person was gone. I pulled back onto the road and eventually merged onto Interstate 20, continuing west toward home. I still don't know what happened that night, but when I looked at the clock, it said 10:13 p.m., and I'm certain time was missing. For weeks, I waited for some kind of news report or mention of the incident, but there was nothing. I even contacted the Monroe Police Department. According to them, there was no record of any 911 calls that night. That's impossible. I know what I saw, and I wasn't alone. Many others saw it too. And many others, just like me, lost power to their vehicles.
That's classic high strangeness, something way beyond your typical cryptid or ghost story. Lost time, vehicle failure, multiple witnesses. This checks so many boxes. Let me know what you think it was in the comments. Next, in an industrial stretch of Milwaukee, a quiet evening turns strange when a witness sees something silently floating through the sky. The sighting occurred on a side street in an industrial neighborhood, just a few blocks from the intersection of Capitol and Palmer in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The date was February 2nd, 2010 at exactly 6:23 p.m. A friend of mine was in a meeting with a local community organization, so I stayed in the car to make a few work-related phone calls. After finishing the calls, I stepped out of the car for a cigarette. I leaned against the driver's side door, facing south as I smoked. That's when I noticed some movement to my right and instinctively looked in that direction. Floating about 15 feet off the ground was an object anywhere from 4 to 5.5 feet long. It was oriented vertically and gliding from west to east at a slow, steady pace, maybe 6 to 8 miles per hour, with a very slight downward slope, perhaps 1 degree. At first, I assumed it was a kite that had come loose, judging by how smoothly and silently it moved. But then it passed beneath a set of power lines and, just a few feet later, suddenly ascended vertically by about 5 feet to clear the top of a nearby building. It continued gliding parallel to the rooftop for roughly 300 feet before my view was blocked by a taller building to my left. The object appeared to be an imperfect cylindrical shape, with a few small protrusions sticking out here and there. When I realized it wasn't a drifting kite, I started thinking about the reports of flying humanoids, but the shape and those protrusions didn't match those accounts. Then, a brief flash of metallic light caught my eye as the object passed a lamppost. The way the light reflected off its surface made it seem more mechanical than organic. Other than that quick glint of metal, the entire object was pitch black. The closest it came to me was about 120 feet, and I was able to watch it for a full 2 minutes. I had plenty of time to try and figure out what I was looking at, but I still can't make sense of it. Even after going home and doing a deep dive through Google Images for UAVs or drones, nothing I've seen even comes close. To this day, I have no idea what that object was. What I love about this story is how subtle it is. No loud crash, no glowing lights, just a black vertical object gliding with purpose. That quiet controlled movement and the metallic glint suggest tech, but not any tech we know, especially in 2010. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't a kite, and it sure wasn't ordinary. Makes you wonder what else is silently drifting above us, just out of sight. Next up, a business trip turns chilling when a guest at a historic hotel is haunted by cigar smoke, phantom footsteps, and a shadowed figure in a hat.
I traveled to Galena, Illinois on business in early May 2011. my employer booked me into the DeSoto House Hotel, a beautifully restored 19th century building with, what I found out later, a lot of history. The day I arrived, I checked in and decided to spend the rest of the evening in my room. I was very tired after the long drive from St. Louis. I ordered room service, ate, watched some TV, and went to bed. A few hours into my sleep, I was startled by what sounded like an argument in the hallway. It lasted a few minutes, then eventually stopped. I quickly fell back asleep. But not long after, I was startled again, this time by more loud talking in the hallway. I looked at the clock. It was 2:10 a.m. I didn't want to get involved, but I needed to sleep, so I called the front desk and reported the noise. The rest of the night was quiet and uneventful. In the morning, I went to the front desk and asked about the ruckus and whether anyone had checked it out. The woman there said there was no note of me calling. I didn't think much of it. The noise had stopped, and I'd managed to sleep well afterward. After a long day, I returned to the hotel and chose to stay in my room again. I had a long drive home the next day and wanted to rest. As I lay in bed watching TV, I started to smell something burning. It was a strong and distinct odor, cigars. Tobacco smoke really bothers me, and this was overpowering. Oddly, I didn't see any smoke. I called the front desk and complained that someone was smoking in one of the rooms. The clerk assured me someone would check it out. After a while, the smell began to fade, but it had made me feel sick to my stomach. Since I wasn't going to fall asleep while nauseous, I decided to work on some paperwork before bed. As I sat on the bed reading a report, I began hearing the sound of heavy footsteps. They moved back and forth across the room. Then I heard what sounded like men talking and laughing. I was definitely spooked. I'd never experienced anything like this before. I tried to ignore it, but the noise would stop, then suddenly start up again. Eventually, the sound stopped. I decided it was time to sleep. I dozed off quickly and was sound asleep until I heard a door slam. It was deafening, and I almost jumped out of my skin. I sat up in bed, dazed and half asleep. I looked around the room. Then I saw something strange. In front of the window stood a tall, dark shadow in the shape of a large man wearing a wide-brimmed hat. It rocked back and forth, and there was a red glow, like someone puffing on a cigar. The cigar smell returned stronger than ever. I felt like I was going to choke. I was terrified, but I tried to stay calm. After a minute or so, the shadow and the smell simply faded away. The rest of the night was completely quiet. I left the next morning without telling anyone at the hotel what I'd experienced. Later, I found out the hotel does have a history of paranormal activity. I've never really been one to believe in the paranormal, but I'll definitely be booking spook-free accommodations from now on.
Real quick, when I'm away from the campfire and not producing this show, I'm a brand designer and coffee roaster. This year I launched my own coffee brand called Outlands Coffee. If you love damn good coffee and want to support a fiercely independent small business while also supporting this podcast, head over to outlandscoffee.com and give us a shot. I roast to order, single origin perfection alongside a couple of bold, adventurous blends, crafted for those who take their coffee as seriously as their campfire stories. Here in Washington, we don't just believe in Bigfoot, we believe in great coffee too. Try it for yourself. Use code CAMPFIRE for $5 off your first order. Now, back to the show. Next, a woman was alone at the beach when a man with lifeless black eyes emerged from the woods, smiling.
It was the summer of 1986, and I had just graduated from high school. I was living in Vancouver, British Columbia, and spent the afternoon sun-tanning at Kitsilano Beach with a girlfriend. She had to leave early for work, so I stayed behind alone. Around 4 p.m., I got hungry and walked up the beach toward an area called Spanish Banks. There's a concession stand there, but it had a long lineup. It was Expo 86 that summer, so the beach was packed with tourists. I placed my order, but they told me it would be a 15 or 20-minute wait for food. I perched myself on a nearby bench to wait. For some reason, I looked across the street. The concession stand sits next to a narrow 2-lane road, and across that road is a forest called the UBC Endowment Lands. A guy was walking down through the forest, which is also a steep hill. There's no sidewalk there, and it's a really dangerous place to try to cross. It was an odd place to come from, just bushes and trees dropping steeply down to the curb, and then a busy street. But the moment I saw him, I felt a deep, gut-wrenching fear. Even from a distance, I could tell he was grinning maliciously. And somehow, I knew. He was fixated on me. He crossed the street easily since there were no cars at that moment. Then he made a direct beeline for where I was sitting. He sat on a bench about 10 or 15 feet away from me. He looked First Nations, maybe 19 or 20, a little older than I was. He had medium-length hair and wore a white t-shirt with a red flannel shirt over it, unbuttoned. He had jeans on. Can't recall his shoes. Maybe some kind of runners. He was fairly attractive, but he radiated something sinister. The word that kept repeating in my head was malicious. And that smile, it was wrong. Unnerving, dead, like a mask. Then there were his eyes. They were black, completely black, with no whites visible. But they weren't shiny. They were dull, like scratched black plastic. The best way I could describe them later was that they gave the same feeling as looking into a microscope or binoculars, where you see your own lashes pressing in, spidery and strange. His eyes and everything about him scared me more than anything else ever had. He sat there grinning at me. He knew I was afraid, and I knew I had to pretend not to be. Even though the beach was crowded, I felt completely alone. No one else seemed to notice anything was off. Knowing that someone or something like him existed made me hate being alive. I felt like the world could never be safe again. Outside, I acted calm. Inside, I was unraveling, sure that my life depended on keeping it together. When my food was finally ready, I got up to grab it and then went straight to a payphone nearby. I turned my back to him and called my boyfriend. I told him to get the fuck to Spanish Banks because there was a scary guy there, and I didn't know what to do. After he hung up, I stayed in the phone booth, pretending to talk to someone. Eventually, I had to leave the booth. Maybe someone else needed it. I sat back on my bench. He was still there, still grinning. A minute or two before my boyfriend arrived, the guy finally stood up. He sauntered away, slowly, down the beach. When my boyfriend got there, he wanted to chase after him. I grabbed his arm hard and told him, "No, we have to leave. Now!" I couldn't explain what had just happened. I still can't explain it properly. It was worse than seeing a murderer. It felt like if that thing ever touched me, it wouldn't just end my life. It would destroy something deeper. It would torment my soul forever.
Coming up, while hunting hogs deep in the swamps of North Carolina, a man realizes he's not the predator out there.
I think a dogman was stalking me once a long time ago when I was hunting wild hogs in the swamps of eastern North Carolina. I was about 20 or 21 at the time. I loved exploring the swamps where I lived and got into hunting wild hogs because it was a serious adrenaline rush. They're pretty aggressive around here. I went into a swamp about 10 miles from my house where there were trails on dry land through a marshy, heavily wooded area. At some point, I heard something close by. I stopped to listen and could hear deep breathing, almost like growling. Then it stopped. This happened a few more times. I changed direction to try and get behind whatever it was, hoping to pin it between me and the water. But it changed direction with me. After about an hour of creeping around, I realized it had moved between me and my only way out of the swamp. That's when I started to get scared. I didn't think it was a hog anymore. I made the decision to get out of there by wading straight through the swamp, with water up to my chest. I think it tried to follow me but wouldn't go into the water. Eventually, I made it back to where I could get to my truck. A few days later, I told my buddy's cousin about it, and mentioned all the bones and weird stuff I saw out there. His whole demeanor changed when I told him where I'd been. He just said, "Stay away from there." I asked him why. He wouldn't say anything else. Fast forward a few years, I'm over at his house and his whole family's there. His uncle came up and said, "I heard you were out in the swamp hunting hogs. You're lucky you made it back." I asked him why. He looked at me and said, "That's where the big dogs live." I asked what he meant. He didn't say another word, and I kept hunting for a few more years, just never in that same spot. Eventually, I got a new job, picked up other hobbies, and started playing in a working band, so I didn't have time for it anymore. I completely forgot about that day until a few years ago, when I saw a Dogman story on YouTube. As soon as I saw it, that day in the swamp came rushing back to me. Since then, I've heard a lot of stories that sound just like mine. I've even heard about Dogman sightings down the coast from where I live. I stay out of the swamp now, and if I have to go in, I never go farther than I need to.
Next, a Tennessee theater worker meets a woman with pitch black eyes and a predatory smile waiting for her in the dark.
I'm a 31-year-old mom and wife, and I work at a theater in Tennessee. I actually drive an hour to work because I love living in Knoxville, but the theater is in Pigeon Forge, a big tourist destination. This happened to me about 3 years ago at work. Because we get so many tourists, we have a timeshare booth that guests can visit. Annoying, I know. The timeshare booth has its own employees, and a lot of them rotate in and out or quit quickly because the job sucks. I was working the night shift, and we were about an hour away from seating the show. I was just a clerk at the time, I'm a manager now, and was walking back from break. As I approached the ticket counter to go through the staff entrance, I noticed a super tall, super skinny woman talking to my coworker. I'm only 4 feet 11 inches, so most people seem tall to me, but this lady had to be close to 6 feet. I could tell my coworker looked uncomfortable, so I stopped to check in and see if everything was okay. When I got to the window, the woman immediately turned to face me. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. She had solid black eyes. Not puffy or swollen, just black. No white at all. They were a normal shape, a little smaller than mine, but completely dark. That's when I understood why my coworker seemed so uneasy. She had long black hair and gave me a predatory smile, like a shark. That's the only way I can describe how it made me feel. She said, "Wow, you must have to be super attractive to work here because you are beautiful." Then she just kept smiling, never breaking eye contact. I didn't know what to say. I awkwardly excused myself and went into the office. The whole encounter shook me. I could feel her watching me until I was completely out of sight. I didn't see the woman again for the rest of my shift. I got off around 11 p.m. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few random cars. It was dark, but the parking lot has enough lights that I usually feel safe walking alone to my car. But then I saw her again. She was with a group of other employees. They were all gathered around a single car at the start of the lot. As I walked past, every single one of them turned to look at me. Silent. She was the only one with black eyes, but they all turned their heads together and watched me. I got in my car and she never stopped smiling. None of them looked away until I turned onto the main road. I never saw any of them talk to each other. Not once. This experience has been on my mind ever since, but I've never seen her again.
Next, a couple's night in a pine forest turns into terror as strange lights descend, unseen beings surround their tent, and reality unravels.
My partner and I were camping deep in an isolated pine forest. It was bitterly cold that night, and no matter what we did, we couldn't keep the campfire going. I couldn't shake a feeling of dread. It came out of nowhere, crawling under my skin and staying there. As the temperature kept dropping, we gave up and climbed into the car to stay warm. That's when I noticed something strange, a bright, star-like object hovering just above the tree line. It didn't stay still. It moved back and forth, then up and down, like it was scanning the woods. About 20 minutes later, we looked to the west and saw 5 more lights floating above the trees. They weren't just lights. They danced, darted, and zipped around like they were alive. Suddenly, the first light dipped behind the trees. Not long after, we spotted a multicolored craft streaking across the sky from the northwest, moving impossibly fast, then vanishing without a sound. The fear really hit us then. We held hands and prayed. That's when something else appeared, an oblong glowing white light that lit up the entire forest floor. It was bright, cold, and didn't feel natural. We grabbed a shotgun and a pistol and retreated into the tent. That's when we started hearing it. Footsteps, several of them, circling us from every direction. It sounded like 6 to 10 people walking around outside, brushing the tent every so often. We sat in silence, barely breathing. Then came a low hum, and the ground beneath the tent began to ripple, like waves of energy pushing through the earth. I looked up through the mesh ceiling. Just above the treetops hovered a bright white-blue sphere, radiating light. A beam suddenly shot down from it, right into our tent. Then the footsteps multiplied, It sounded like 30 or 40 beings were now surrounding us. There were other sounds too. A strange whipping wind and this high-pitched yipping bark that chilled me to my bones. At one point, an orange, white, and blue pulsating light appeared right next to the tent. It grew in size, pulsing like a heartbeat, then blinked out of existence. When daylight finally came, we stumbled out of the tent. That's when we saw them. Footprints, cloven, toed, and some three-toed, large and deep in the soil. On the dusty car windows, long four-fingered handprints, thin and skeletal. We packed up and got out of there fast. When we told our families, they didn't believe a word of it. They said we were possessed. But I know what we saw, and I'll never forget it.
For our final story of the evening, we have a moonlit graveyard, a gray statue-like figure, and dreams that bleed into reality. Some encounters refuse to let you go, and this is one of them.
This happened about 25 years ago when I lived in Fort Dodge, Iowa. My boyfriend and I went to a graveyard one night because he had told me a story about seeing something strange there. He didn't really want to take me, but I insisted. He said he'd heard stories that if you went there and sat every night, you'd eventually see it. He told me he had seen it himself on the third or fourth night he went. According to him, it was man-like and gray, but he only caught a glimpse before he left and never went back. I remember him saying his car had trouble when it appeared. Of course, that only made me more determined to go. On the third night, we saw it. We were sitting in the dark with the moon as our only light when we both suddenly felt creeped out for the first time during any of our visits. We decided to leave and never come back. But when we tried to start the car, my car, which had never given me trouble before and wouldn't again for years, it wouldn't start. My boyfriend was driving and kept trying. Eventually, the engine turned over and the headlights came on. That's when we saw it. It was standing right in front of the car. It was about 7 feet tall and gray. To me, it looked like a moving statue. It was bent over, just staring into the windshield at us. We were freaking out. Then it shifted a bit, and the car started. The thing darted to the left so quickly I thought if it reached the side windows, we'd both be dead in seconds. It was that fast. But instead, it stood to the side of the car, watching us as we drove away. The cemetery was laid out in a loop, an old gravel road that circled around and led back to the same entrance as the exit. We were spinning tires and slinging gravel the whole way, trying to get out. When we passed the place where it had stood, it was still there, just watching us. It had let us leave, but it was looking directly at me. I was on the passenger side, facing it. I couldn't make out its features in the dark, but I'll never forget how I felt in that moment. I was overwhelmed by the most crushing depression I've ever experienced. It felt like everything I had ever loved was being destroyed in front of me. The pain and loss were so intense, it literally took my breath away. That night, when I finally got home and fell asleep, I had a dream. In the dream, the thing was calling out to me from the cemetery, begging me to come back. It didn't seem evil in the dream. It was harmless, miserable, and stuck in that old graveyard, alone and suffering. When I woke up, I felt a deep need to go back. I was determined to find it and help. But before I could tell my boyfriend, I got 3 phone calls, from him and 2 of my best friends. All 3 had nightmares that night where the thing brutally murdered me. The 2 girls had no idea about the graveyard visit. I hadn't told anyone about it. It was so late when I got home, I just went to bed. My boyfriend's dream was the most disturbing. In it, I had gone back to the graveyard out of guilt. He followed me and found the thing tearing me apart, ripping me open. For a long time after that, I kept dreaming about it. It would say, "I won't hurt you. Please come back and help me. I am suffering." Even after hearing about the nightmares where I died, I had to fight the urge to return. That urge eventually faded, maybe with time, kids, and everyday life, but I still think about it, more often than I'd like to admit. Sometimes I get the tiniest itch just to drive through again. I know it's dumb, but there's always been that little voice in the back of my mind, whispering about the thing we saw that night. It had a masculine physique, but no genitalia. Its eyes were pitch black, no iris, no whites, just pure inky nothingness. I've been searching for years for something like it. The closest I've found are Wendigo depictions, but only the ones without fur or antlers. Just a gray, sexless humanoid. Honestly, The best way to describe it is still this. It looked like a statue. A statue that moved.
I keep turning this one over in my mind. It doesn't sound like a pale crawler, but definitely shares some characteristics. It wasn't trying to scare them off. It almost seemed desperate, sad, depressive. Could it be some kind of elemental, something bound to the land, or maybe even an echo of something older, forgotten by time but still aware? I really don't know. But whatever it wasn't just watching, it was reaching out to her. And I suggest never going back. That's all for tonight, dear listeners, unless you are a Patreon cult member, where the night's just getting started. I've got 15 more minutes of bone-chilling, real-life horror that'll have you second-guessing every twig snap on your next solo hike. And please remember, if you want to support this podcast and love a damn good cup of coffee, head on over to outlandscoffee.com and use code CAMPFIRE for $5 off your first order and give us a try. If you want to become a Patreon cult member to get extended episodes and other full Patreon-only episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/campfirecultpod for only $5 a month. Until next time, I'll be leaving you in the dark where whispers linger and shadows dance. Stay wary, sleep well, and beware the whispers in the night. If you have a story to tell, please reach out via email at contact@campfirecultpod.com or leave me a voicemail message at 720-297-8608. You can follow us anywhere on social media at Campfire Cult Pod and online at campfirecultpod.com. And finally, if you don't mind, please rate and review wherever possible.